Hi, this is Zena Harris.
And I'm Mark Rabin.
Welcome to the tie-in.
Hey,
Good evening, Zena.
good evening. Yes, we are talking to each other at, I don't know, it's 10:22 at night
Yeah,
because
yeah. It's a
that's,
little bit late at the end of a long day, long week, um, but fruitful, but
yeah.
still, yeah, super long. Um, yeah, I got back to Vancouver last week,
Oh, yeah.
and then went straight to Alberta, where where I hung out there for a little bit. I have another gig that was near Edmonton.
Okay.
And then I spent the weekend in Calgary, which for all of our listeners who haven't been to Calgary, it is popping off.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, it's where the oil and energy business are,
Yeah.
but the weather was nice, and there's just like tons of opportunity in young people and just, just energy, just really like palpable energy. And
Hmm.
that was, I mean, super inspiring. And then now back in Vancouver.
Okay.
Back
So
at it.
are you gonna stay put for a little while? Like, what's
Yeah.
your,
Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
okay.
I'm traveling to Toronto for a couple days in May 20th to the 23rd if anybody's there and wants to meet up for coffee. But other than that, I am here. I'm like trying to
Okay.
get routine, get the diet back on,
Yeah.
like drink less coffee, eat vegetables, the stuff you eat on the road. It's like it's always got like, no matter how healthy it is, it's like just salt, get extra salt or
Oh
just really
man.
not the best ingredients.
I know. It's really difficult. It's really difficult to eat healthy on the road for sure. For
I
sure.
know.
Well, shoot, I'm gonna miss you in Toronto. I'm going at the end of May, like the 29th, 30th, something
Mm,
like that. So I'll be there after you. So,
yeah.
oh
What are you
well.
doing there?
The Canadian Academy Awards are later this month,
Okay.
and I'm going.
All right. I
Yeah.
wish I had known. Could have booked a trip. I don't get invited to those things though. I'm not at the same level.
Yeah. Well, I'm on a review committee, so
Oh, that's great.
so I got
So,
invited this year.
and speaking of impact summits and awards, you're at the Environmental Media Association right now.
Yeah.
What's going on down there? I've never
Yeah.
been.
Yeah, this is their Impact Summit. So they do two events. One is an Impact Summit, which is a couple days of panels and talks. And then another one, I think it's in, I don't know,
It's the
like
awards, right?
October,
Is it
is
the
the
EMA awards?
awards. Yeah.
Right.
So
The
I've gone
gala.
to, yeah, it's like more like red or, whatever, green carpet and that sort of thing. I've been to those, but I haven't been to the Impact Summit. And so it's my first time. Um, yeah, it's good. I mean, today was a lot about the LA wildfires and like
Mm-hmm.
building
Mm-hmm.
back in a more
Yep.
resilient way and what that looks like, and organizations who have kind of sprung to life like right after the fires and started, helping people, and what did that look like, um and then there was some session on like, children's programming around STEM
Yeah.
um subjects and whatnot. So just kind of encouraging um, women actually to, go into STEM fields. So, uh, that was
It,
on,
it,
that's, in more uh, nature, wild programming
mhm.
through
It's
PBS
interesting.
and the call for, support for PBS, the public broadcasting system, because um, It's on the chopping block, because it
Yeah,
receives federal funding, that kind of
but not
thing.
even that much, right? Compared to like, I mean, at least CBC here gets a lot more funding, or as a
Yeah,
percentage.
but
Uh,
still, there's been calls for like PBS and NPR to, you
hmm,
know,
yeah.
be defunded. So, there's a bit of rallying around that. So,
But one thing you mentioned there earlier, or just a second ago, about the resiliency and wildfire stuff. I mean,
mhm.
that's a theme, right? Because I think that was a big theme at LA Climate Week as well.
Yeah,
I attended a whole day session basically on rebuilding and resiliency, and yeah, just such an impact on the community. But it's like, yeah, like let's rally behind this thing. If you're gonna rally behind something, like that's a pretty good one,
totally.
pretty
And people
strong.
were like, LA 28's coming,
Hmm.
FIFA's coming. Like, we got to rebuild
Yeah.
and we got to show the world that a big city like LA can rebuild and, rebuild in a smart way, not just, the way that, they had, folks had before. So, such a real opportunity. I really like
Hmm.
that word, opportunity,
Hmm. Hmm.
you know? So,
Yeah.
yeah.
One thing that struck me when I was in those sort of working groups and so on was that actually one of the challenges is that it's not that all the places burned down Palisades, it's that it's very toxic,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because of all the building materials and whatever, electronics and cars and I don't know, whatever, like plastics that were in there and the stuff that it goes like it's going in the water table. Like it's like a toxic zone.
Yeah.
So you can't just like go there and start like removing this stuff, right? It's like I don't know what they're gonna do, but you can't even go there actually unless you have like a special
Like
pass
a
to go in and
pass or
check out your
something.
place.
Hmm.
Anyways,
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of an interesting thing that you don't really think about.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. There's a lot. There's a lot. A lot of people are thinking about it.
I believe it's possible.
It's all possible. It's all possible.
Yeah, totally. That's
Yeah.
crazy. Well, I mean, look, it's we're not going to be immune from wildfires in Canada this year. That's for sure. That's the talk of everything right now. It's
Right.
super dry outside right now already. And like it's going to be something to keep an eye out.
Oh,
That's for
yeah.
sure.
Yeah.
You
So
know.
what happens in California or how they rebuild is going to be sort of the template for other jurisdictions.
Hmm.
So,
Hmm.
um,
We'll stay tuned on that.
mhm.
And hopefully some good content comes out of this too. Some good stories.
Totally.
Some
Totally.
good stories.
Yeah.
And then I'm preparing on my end. I throw a little festival where it's like an
Ooh.
arts community off-grid festival that we do it about 5 hours north of Vancouver, deep in the mountains, nestled in the mountains out near a place called Lillooet. And about 300 people, 350 people, depending. We've been doing it for 4 years. It's called Friends Club, which is just the name stuck. At some point, we were like, do we
Friends
keep calling it? Do
Club?
we not? We're like, let's call it Friend. We're like, no, it's Friends Club. And it's just the coolest little thing. And we have like different crews, the people. There's like a crew like called the Mad Teas out of like Seattle, actually. We've got groups of friends that come from the island. We were having some groups of people that coming from Alaska, and everybody's coming together, and we sort of like co-create this like off-grid experience,
Huh.
powered by solar and batteries, of course. And it's by a river, and it's on this like beautiful piece of land. We've got saunas, and we do music and food and workshops. Yeah, so that's kind of like starting to take up some more of my time, but it all falls back around my love of production, like all this stuff just stems out of that production. And when I started Portable Electric, like this is what we first did. Like I
Yeah.
literally showed up at the regional Burning Man with my prototypes, and I was like, all right, guys, let's see what we can do with these things. Right. And so it just kind of like, so my true love, there's still sort of like powering experiences with
Yeah.
renewable energy.
Yeah.
And then obviously Hollywood film production stuff came along and so on. But it's going to be a really interesting year in general for all these things. I mean, I'm having some great conversations. Hot off Coachella, of course, too, right? Um, that was a great success as well. So yeah, a lot of stuff going on in the space, and no matter what the politics are, to be honest. So it's
People are
happening.
doing this. People are doing it. It's like, you know, every day there's some kind of headline, some kind of shitty headline or whatever
Yeah,
about what's
yeah,
going on.
exactly. Like,
And,
meh.
the world's chaotic and all this stuff. And yet we're having conversations about resiliency and building back and, how we're going to make things better. And people are doing it.
Mhm. But interesting to your point to actually, but what's interesting is what's changing now in sort of these more Trumpian times is we're not stopping to do what we're doing, but the language is changing.
Yeah.
And I actually like that. I'm like, I don't care what you call it. Like, don't call it climate change or call it renewable energy or don't call it this. Like, call it rebuilding and resiliency. Look, clean tech, right? Call it energy,
Efficiency, whatever.
energy innovation, infrastructure, like
Yeah.
resilient, but blah, who cares? Like I'm not going to get caught up on what it's called. I'm looking right now. I've been taking notes on this thing, right? Like,
People just speaking, using different terminology.
yeah, yeah. What is it?
Yeah. I mean, I think we just picked up on it. Maybe it was like a cultural thing, or maybe, it's just what people are used to when we were at South by Southwest in Texas,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like that was, like just people talk about it differently. Um, we're talking a lot about resiliency here in LA right now
Mm-hmm.
and adaptation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
that's one.
mhm.
Um, right? It's like moving away from terms like climate change and decarbonization towards more focused and potentially less controversial language, right? Instead of broad concepts, you might see a focus on specific solutions like practical benefits like energy independence,
Yeah.
supply chain diversification,
Ooh.
resilience to weather extremes, right?
Hmm.
Like, I'm like, fuck yeah, that's
Yeah,
great. That's actually makes kind of more sense.
totally. Totally. Other word I've been using, and I said it earlier, opportunity space. Who doesn't want that? Who doesn't want to step into that one?
Okay, so let's get to another ones here. Instead of climate change, no comment.
Okay, it's
Opportunity
so
space.
late at night that my brain is a little loopy. Okay, so forget it.
Climate change, right? Emphasis might be on weather extremes. Um, terms like energy independence and supply chain diversification, right?
You already
Over
said that.
decarbonization, increase efficiency, right?
Yeah.
Um, instead, okay, here's another one. Terms that are perceived as alarmist, like climate emergency or catastrophic climate change, might be replaced with more neutral or less urgent language. Oh, there's no examples. Um, anyway, I'm having fun with this one because it's like here's one. Clean energy transition for frontline communities is what it may be before. After, energy innovation that enhances American energy independence, reliability, and domestic manufacturing,
Ooh, yes, very
right?
domestic focused.
Around job creation. So anyway, if any of our listeners out there, please send us some of these learnings or comment on this because I'm tracking this now and I think it's important. I think if your business is doing, in this industry or sustainability or job community organizing and things like that, like, it might be helpful to start to think around changing some of the language there because the money's still there. The people's pain is still there. Our,
Oh yeah.
extreme weather is still there. So anyways, something to think about. I've been thinking
Hmm.
about.
Hmm. Cool. We'll circle back on this in
Yeah,
maybe a few weeks to see what else you have on your list, or if anybody has sent us any cool feedback on
exactly.
this.
Exactly. Or even, is this even worth it? Or should we just like hold out and just like keep hammering on the old terminology and not worry about it?
Yeah, might as well evolve.
I think so. We all need
Yeah,
energy independence and security.
yeah, sure. Everybody wants that,
Mhm.
right? Okay.
Awesome. Are you have one more day left at the EMA summit?
Yes, one more day. Yeah, and then I go home. So
Sweet.
mhm.
Is there any stars there? Any big
There are
names?
a few. There are a few.
Hmm.
Saw one of the Property Brothers today. Um, yeah, talking about building and whatnot. So yeah, there are a few folks here. So it's good to see the engagement. It
Hmm.
is. It is. There are a couple comments about sustainability behind the scenes.
Hmm.
It's good to hear people bringing that up unprompted. And, you know, I'm happy to hear that. They talked about water bottles. So
Oh
we're
yeah.
still we're still working on that. Yeah.
Still working on water bottles.
I
You know what? Let's
mean,
just go to like water cartons and just forget about the whole thing around water bottles. Just be like, here's your paper water bottle and get on with it. Or Tetra
yeah.
Pak.
Yeah. Well, they were talking, yeah, so we've gotten to the point where people are bringing up, sustainable production on their own. Great. That's
Hmm.
great. The things that they're noticing are that they didn't have plastic water bottles on set. So that's good. It's vegetarian food being served. That's good. Um, so we're getting, slowly but surely, we're
Hmm.
getting there. Um, but it's like,
10 years on, 15 years on.
we've been working on this for 10 years.
Yeah.
So, and there's some pretty cool stuff that's happening on sets. So this is why we talk about it on the
Yeah.
podcast and we bring people
Yep.
on and hear about the stuff. And, we really need to ramp up the communication on
Hmm.
this
Hmm.
because the word needs to spread.
Yeah. Well, we have
So,
some crazy good guests coming up here in the next
hmm
few months. So we're booking them,
hmm
and just having deeper conversations
yeah,
all around. And hopefully you're out there giving out business cards, tie-in business cards.
our little stickers. Yes, totally.
Oh man,
Yeah,
good times.
yeah.
Well, we'll have fun out there, and yeah, we'll be in touch next week. And thanks for listening, everybody. And any feedback, we've been hearing lots of good feedback. You guys like the banter, and we missed it last week or this week. Yeah, last week, but yeah, we'll put it in our calendars and catch it when we can.
Yeah, we need to stop traveling so much, I think is really
Hmm.
what it is. We
Hmm.
need to both be like a little more settled and that way our schedules will align a little bit better.
Yeah, it's all about
So
routine.
yeah, so we're not doing it at like 10 o'clock at night. So okay.
All right.
Very
Good
good. Good
night.
to see you.
You too. All
All
right.
right.
Later. Hi, everybody, and welcome back to the tie-in. Today, we're speaking with Sherri Goodman. She's a seasoned leader, executive, and board director with a unique blend of expertise spanning national security, energy, and environmental policy. Sherri serves as a senior fellow at the Woodrow Wilson International Center's Polar Institute and Environmental Change and Security Program, and a senior strategist for the Center for Climate and Security, also served as the Security Secretary General of the International Military Council on Climate and Security, bringing together leading military and security experts to address the national security threats posed by climate change. And on top of all of this incredible work, she has a new book out called Threat Multiplier: Climate, Military Leadership, and the Fight for Global Security. Sherri, welcome to the tie-in.
It's a pleasure to be with you all.
Wow, Sherri. I mean, like I am so impressed with your body of work in your experience. I'll say that, I went to you had a session at South by Southwest recently. I went to that and was just floored by the quality of the session, the conversation, the insights there. So I'd love to touch on some of that too in this conversation. But can you give us, I mean, Mark just read your fabulous background, but can you tell us just a bit about yourself, and how you got into this work?
Okay, great. Sure. I started out my career during the Cold War when, let's say, the hunt for Red October characterized relations between the United States and the Soviet Union in the Arctic. I was a classic Cold Warrior. I worked on nuclear weapons. And I did that in my first job on the Senate Armed Services Committee. And I'd say, and during that time, all the weapons reactors in the United States failed for environment, safety, and health lapses. And I say my career went from weapons to waste. And then we were cleaning up. So think of all the movies about environmental cleanup and toxic waste. Those were, we had many Superfund sites at military bases, and I devoted the next decade of my life during the 90s to environmental progress in the United States military and the Department of Defense. And I'd say we went from being seen as environmental laggards to environmental and conservation leaders. Military has the second largest landholder in the United States, has lots of important ecosystems and endangered species on bases, particularly, let's say, in California. From if you think of the area between Los Angeles and San Diego, the only green space on the coast is Camp Pendleton. And that's an important Marine Corps base, but it also has lots of endangered species, fragile ecosystems. So there's a stewardship responsibility there as well. Now, also in the 90s, I worked with the Russians as at the end of the Cold War, where we're trying to reduce waste across the Soviet Union associated with nuclear weapons. And we ran a program called Arctic Military Environmental Cooperation, where we helped the Russians safely offload liquid waste streams from sunken Russian submarines so that it could be safely moved inland for better storage. So this has been sort of my progress. I then worked on climate. That was really the last 2 decades has been the nexus of climate and security with military leaders and national security professionals, because really we've moved from the nuclear age. Of course, we still have nuclear weapons, and that's a threat, but to the climate era, where so much of how we will see our future is determined by a changing climate.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And so kind of just then taking into account, the Arctic as a focal point here, what can you tell us a little bit about why the Arctic is so important right now?
Sure. And let me back up and just set the stage a little bit from the
Sure.
first question, which is also the title of my book, Threat Multiplier. In 2007, I organized the first group of generals and admirals to assess the national security implications of climate change. And we spent a year of study with the nation's leading climate scientists and with national security and intelligence professionals in the US and the UK. And we released a report then called National Security and the Threat of Climate Change, where we characterized climate change in the phrase I coined as a threat multiplier for instability in volatile regions of the world. And we knew it would affect us even in stable regions. And that's really become the framing and the conceptual framework, if you will, for thinking about climate as a security issue for the last 2 decades. Now, let's apply that in the Arctic. In the Arctic, temperatures are rising 4 times the global average, and sea ice is retreating and melting, and permafrost is thawing and melting. So we now have an Arctic that is being changed by climate and also being changed by geopolitical competition. So we have a variety of forces. So from the hunt for Red October, which sort of characterized the US and the Soviet Union facing off in their nuclear submarines during the Cold War, now we have contests that are not only below the sea, but at the surface or in the air because of the retreating sea ice and the melting and the melting permafrost. We now have a much more navigable Arctic. And so now when we think about how we're going to manage in the Arctic, the more recent reference would be the last episode of The Diplomat, where as Vice President Allison Janney is giving a tutorial to Kerry Russell as the ambassador about why it's important for the U.S. to be able to have access to the bases that control the access for the Russian submarines moving off of their bases in Murmansk and out towards the Atlantic coast, what we call the Greenland, Iceland, UK gap. Now, let's put that in context. Okay, so we still have submarine threats, but we also have threats of a changing climate. And so now we have much more risk when we're operating in the region. And not only do we have the risk to manage of our submarine threats, but we also have the risks of a potential accident in the Arctic. We have more ships happening up there now. And if you think of an accident, and we did a scenario exercise a few years ago looking at a Russian nuclear-powered icebreaker navigating through the very narrow Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia, which is only 50 miles apart at best in some portions of it. And if there's an accident and an oil spill or a hazardous waste or potentially involving nuclear power systems, you could have risks that we haven't seen since Exxon Valdez, which was in Alaska, but not in the Arctic. And that could make an oil spill look Exxon Valdez easy to clean up. And we know that was decades of ecosystem repair and damage to that area. So there's a lot that's changed. And now you have Putin wants to monetize the northern sea route that hugs the shallow northern coastline of Russia, the Arctic coastline, and turn it into a toll road for transportation from ports in Asia to ports in Europe. So think of this as a new shipping lane in the future. And with sea ice retreating and temperatures rising, scientists predict that we could have ice-free summers in the Arctic potentially as early as 2035 or 2040. Now, China itself eyes a more open Arctic and has declared in policy written back already in 2018 that it is a near Arctic stakeholder and envisions a polar Silk Road that connects to its larger Belt and Road initiative across Asia and Africa to give it access to the shorter shipping lanes, to energy, resources, and potentially even in the future, fish. We know now that with warmer temperatures, global fish stocks are moving towards both poles, towards the Arctic and the Antarctic. And China has the largest global fishing fleet, and it's often illegal and unreported fishing around the world among its fleets. And as we see the equatorial regions that have been very productive for fisheries overfished and illegally fished, we see these fishing fleets moving further towards both poles.
Mhm. Mhm.
Wow, Sherry, the first thing that comes to mind here is the complexity of this. It's not just, ice melting and gas hydrides coming up, or it's not just the shipping lane, or it's not just geopolitics. How do you break it down for the lay person to be like, what are the key drivers that are driving the interest in the Arctic, and what are some of the things that we're doing right now to address those issues?
I mean, the key drivers are really the growing competition for the resources in the Arctic, energy, minerals, shipping lanes, in the future, subseabed mining, and also just control of different routes and potentially now spheres of influence. We've gone from a time when the Arctic was characterized by cooperation. And even during the Cold War, we actually had a lot of cooperation in the Arctic. Despite, the Hunt for Red October scenario, we had above the surface, we had an Arctic Council that was established 25 years ago that brought together not only the 8 Arctic coastal states, but also many, many observers from China to India, and many indigenous groups. And they had worked together through working groups to address a lot of the non-security issues in the region, science, and maritime issues, and communication and education, and many other related subjects. With increased aggression by Russia against Ukraine, and they're close to the Arctic, we've seen now, and as climate change also has accelerated, those risks have led to more competition. And now also the time we're living in, between global leaders, seems to be characterized more by managing two spheres of influence that potentially than by global cooperation in a range of regions for a range of reasons. And so if you apply that in the Arctic, you see that we have, and you look at, and just take the map, if you can envision, for example, the map of North America. Think of North America, and you have Alaska is your 2, and Greenland is your 10, okay? And that is the North American continent, okay? And then, you've got Russia, which is the largest, got the largest Arctic coastline, very large Arctic area. That's the Euro-Russia, sort of, we call it the high north for our allies in that region. And then you have other players, but many others see interest in the Arctic. For example, just earlier today, I was on I recorded a talk for a conference in India about the Arctic. Now you might say, why are the Indians interested in the Arctic? Well, we say here, we have an expression that what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. So it's important to understand that with Arctic environmental change, the changes that are occurring in that region are affecting us all around the world. In the United States, for example, we have the polar vortexes we get now, where we have sometimes frigid temperatures as far down as Texas. Remember the Texas freeze a few years ago. That is partly attributed to the polar vortex, because we have a warmer and more variable Arctic circulation pattern now. And in India, they're quite worried that their monsoon season, which is so important to agricultural productivity and the economy of the region, is going to be disrupted by Arctic change. And also, India, like many other nations, Japan, South Korea, others, have a very robust science and technology system, and they want to understand what's happening at both poles, because it affects, for example, the Himalayas and ice and the glaciers that are already retreating in that region.
So, I mean, we say this kind of casually, but everything is connected. There are major systems at play, both environmental, natural systems, but also geopolitical systems at play. You mentioned, the 8 Arctic coastal states and a treaty that in the past. But how are these players cooperating now? Like, what is the big threat to pay attention to now?
In our own country, we have an administration that wants to break things and break a lot of traditions and norms of the past. And
Yeah.
so we're seeing that happen all over the place. And that is disruptive for our allies. Think of Canada, our neighbor to the north, a very important also Arctic nation. And also our other Arctic allies are the European nations, Norway, Sweden, Finland, Denmark, Iceland. So they're all in different ways feeling the changes wrought both by Putin, Russia's aggression in Ukraine that's disruptive of Europe, which has raised eyebrows about what potential threats Russia might pose in the high north part of the Arctic in the future, and also about the strength of our alliances, because because of the disruptive nature of this current administration.
It stresses me out, Sherry. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, the first thing I thought after your fabulous panel recently, and what I'm thinking now is like, holy shit, like we have to pay attention to this. Like, um, have you noticed an increased attention as you've been talking to a lot of folks and kind of bringing this out, and your new book is out and whatnot? Have you seen the attention shift a bit? Are people like on the inside, maybe of government or nonprofits and whatnot? Are they concerned? Are they planning differently?
Well, I want to make two observations for your listeners that maybe provide a little bit of hope. First, while I've been working in the Arctic, for decades, I now see much more widespread interest around the country. I mean, that South by Southwest would have a panel on Arctic
I
security.
know.
And, and I just got another invitation earlier today to speak in South Carolina on Arctic security. So there are many places, that outside of in the U.S., outside of Washington, D.C. and Alaska, that are interested in Arctic issues. So, and maybe it's in part because of all the discussion about Greenland in the last few months. And we could go there if you like. So, I think it's good that we're bringing attention to the Arctic because the U.S. has long been an Arctic nation, and we should appreciate the opportunities and the risks
Mhm.
that we have as an Arctic nation. Um, Now, secondly, I would say that despite the tensions occurring at the level of national leaders, there is still a lot of cooperation that occurs among professionals in different fields across the
Mhm.
Arctic. It could be scientists, it could be national security experts. I was just also spoke at a seminar this morning that was about um, improved domain awareness in the Arctic with a number of European allies. So people are still thinking and working together and collaborating. And I think a lot of that collaboration, as we say, often goes on, below the radar. And it's good and it should continue.
So something that comes up, at least in Canada, as well as, I mean, the close-knit relationship with the indigenous cultures and peoples that are in the Arctic and obviously in the polar region. Um, are there discussions around how to include them as stewards of the Arctic, who've been obviously doing it for 10,000 plus years or 20,000 years, and also on I know there's them from the Rangers. There's all types of different groups that are also looking at from a more strategic, um, yeah, geopolitical way. I don't know. I was wondering where the indigenous cultures are coming into the conversation and what you're hearing.
Yes, thank you, Mark. There has been a lot of focus in recent years of more inclusivity with the indigenous Alaskan in the U.S. with Native Alaskan peoples, the different groups in Canada, as well as in other parts of the Arctic. We also talk about integrating that indigenous knowledge into the Western knowledge and cooperative knowledge uh, development and ways of understanding, because really the people who live in the Arctic are on the front lines of a changing Arctic.
Hmm.
So if I put it in national security terms, they are on the front lines of understanding the changing domain. And they are the front lines of domain awareness. They see how the ice is changing. So if they can't conduct, if they can't go out for the walrus hunt or the fishing in the same way that they would before, that's also an indicator of, who else, what other actors might be able to be up there. So understanding all of that becomes critically important. And we have seen, for example, at the Wilson Center Polar Institute, where I work, we have embedded, Native Alaskans and indigenous professionals who are working very closely with us. That's been very much part of our work since the beginning.
And I think one other point to that, the Arctic versus other areas, where we're going to see, like for example, you mentioned India, where it probably won't be uncommon to see 100 million or more environmental refugees migrating in some direction or another. However, in the Arctic, it really is very, very sparsely populated. So that statement that you say, what happens in the Arctic doesn't stay in the Arctic. Um, but that's really not affecting people directly in the Arctic, but it is truly affecting Earth systems and peoples all around the planet. Um, but it is interesting, right? How are conversations happening in such a sparsely populated area? Because there are many things that can happen where nobody notices up there. Um, and I think that's something that always comes up to me. Maybe it's kind of an open-ended question, but it's so sparsely populated that and I've been to the highest Arctic. I've been to Northern Baffin Island and Pond Inlet in Iqaluit and um in Nunavut, I mean, Iqaluit's the capital. But yeah, so and it was just felt barren, It's like this so open and landscape, and obviously the Inuit are the sort of stewards of the land up there. Um, but it is interesting that everybody's it's the top of the talk of the town here. Everybody's talking about it. So, anyway, it's sort of open-ended question, but it's around population and it being so sparsely populated.
Yes, but I think since the people of the Arctic have lived that way now for centuries, they have found ways to communicate and stay connected. I mean, I've been up both in the Alaskan Arctic. I was just this last summer in Greenland, and that the communities are connected via, they travel mostly either by boat or by dog sled. The roads network is very limited, or by air. And people I think they understand um, the habitat. They have a sort of additional senses in some ways to understand the relationship to the land that are sharpened because of the way they live. We talk about it as like co-production of knowledge, that the Western way of learning needs to also recognize other ways of learning and communicating. And so I think we need to respect that. Respect that.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So as this as as you're talking about it, as others are talking about the Arctic, what is the key message or key point that you want folks to take away from like either this conversation or conversations you're having to that and how can we then help in this? Was it through, engagement with nonprofits or how do we take this and then do something with it from a sort of broader public perspective?
Well, thank you very much, Zena. I think the Arctic, because of what we've just talked about, the climate change and the increasing competition for resources, is really on the cusp of a major system change. I mean, the Arctic of the future will not look like the Arctic that I grew up in. It could be much more open. There could be, and there perhaps won't be, just the primarily indigenous populations. We know that in Russia, for example, there are many industrial cities. We
Yeah.
know that, for example, Greenland is going to have start its first nonstop flights from New York to Nuuk this summer. So there's going to be much more access for Americans, for example, to Greenland than there has been in the past. And that's going to lead to a certain amount of tourism and development. It still will be a remote and fragile place in which to operate. In some ways, the risks could be higher of an accident, uh, because there's so much that's still unknown. And as the ice melts, there's actually more ice often in the waterways, and it becomes more complicated to operate. But I think it is a harbinger of the future that we're seeing. It's beautiful when you go there, places like Greenland and Svalbard, and I'm sure what you've seen in the Canadian Arctic, and I've seen it, it's beautiful, and we should find ways, that we can allow that we can manage the change that is already occurring, reduce those risks, and see it as a sustainable future. Now, there's going to be a lot of debate about what that means and how to achieve that, and it's important to have an open and vibrant discussion among all the major stakeholders of the region.
Mhm.
Just to take Zena's question a little bit into the entertainment direction, because obviously we speak a lot about entertainment and sustainability and storytelling, and I'm just wondering if you had to put on an entertainment lens to this, what would be the best way or to tell stories of the Arctic, not from this, maybe not from a doom and gloom perspective or a sort of a wartime, but have you any thoughts that might inspire some of our listeners who might be looking to produce content that take the Arctic and climate into consideration?
Well, I'll share a couple of, I guess I'll share a couple of thoughts, Mark and Zena. I mean, as I said, we did a rigorously developed scenario exercise with the National Science Foundation a few years ago in Arctic Futures 2050, where the scenario was a Russian nuclear icebreaker colliding with a Chinese liquid natural gas vessel in the Bering Strait between Alaska and Russia, and of the risks of an oil spill or a nuclear incident. And what would
Mhm.
happen? I mean, we know that Russia's nuclear safety record is not one that makes me rest well at night, from Chernobyl, to the sinking of the Kursk submarine where all the sailors were lost. The US has never lost a sailor aboard a nuclear submarine. Okay, so we have, so there are high risks out there. Now, they may be low probability, of such an incident occurring, but they're higher than they were in the past. And there are a lot of unknowns. And as to the indigenous and local populations would be important in any search and rescue or oil spill cleanup. And there could be international incidents, and thinking about how countries would respond, how local communities would respond, um, and so there are a variety of scenarios one could develop around ships or tourist vessels, or more land-based activities. Or I mean, there's also the fact that permafrost is thawing at a rapid rate in the Arctic, and that's releasing more methane. And we know that methane is among the most potent greenhouse gases. And we also know that we are not properly accounting for methane release from permafrost in global climate models. So even though we're falling short of meeting climate goals in general, our accounting system looks at methane mostly from oil and gas production, not from the permafrost thaw and release. So you've got this whole other set of changes in the natural system that are going to be occurring. I mean, a lot of Russian infrastructure in the Arctic is built on permafrost, and that's
Hmm.
that's another scenario where things could go wrong. Maybe in the future there'll be more cooperative mechanisms to set that ship a bit better straight. But for now we're living in a perilous time.
Yeah. Are we ever? Uh,
I'm
it's
stressed.
I'm not. I don't think so. I'm not stressed. My take on it is I'm not stressed. I mean, this has been going on for a long time, and when we look at, I'm a geologist by trade, and when we look at, I mean, there used to be 2 miles of ice around the polar caps, and 20,000 years ago, and they've been slowly melting over those times, and sea level rise has been rising. I think we've just gotten ahead of ourselves in the Anthropocene here in the last 300 plus years, where we've just thought we dominated the earth and everything was going to be fine and dandy. We're the, we can build everything we want wherever we want and no consequences. So I do think it's humbling, for humanity. This is one of the last areas on the planet that are the most remote that maybe teach us something about ourselves, right? And that's something that just from a yeah, I don't know. That's just kind of what popped into my head there because you can go to the deepest jungle and still be on your cell phone and no problem, right? And you can go anywhere in the world, but the Arctic and the Antarctic are still very, very remote. They're hard to
Yes.
get to, and there's something some mysteries there that we still need to understand. So I think there's something there that excite me on that
Oh
front.
yes, it's so exciting to be in the Arctic, and I think people feel that mystical or mysterious sense of the unknown
Hmm.
and the remoteness, combined with the beauty
Yeah.
of the just such a unique uh, ice, ice-filled landscape. I've never seen water so blue
Hmm.
or ice so clear, or just so many different types of ice as you see when you're in Greenland, and you feel like you're on the front lines of a changing climate there because you can hear
Yeah.
the ice calving and melting, and you can see the Great Greenland ice sheet as it's retreating. And now, if you want a helicopter up to see the ice sheet, you land actually on sand and gravel because the ice sheet has retreated so much from where the original helicopter pad has been in some spaces.
Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Sherri. This has been a fabulous conversation. I have one more question for you. We are asking all of our guests this question, in a hope to kind of put together, a few puzzle pieces. We're creating a playbook of guiding principles, if you will, for sustainability and entertainment. And you can kind of think broadly about that, maybe from a storytelling perspective or whatnot. But from your perspective, what can you offer us? What guiding principle might you offer us, to include in this playbook?
For me, I think, the future in the Arctic is both about climate security and international security. It's not one or the other. We
Mhm.
have to be aware, that a changing climate is affecting our our security in the region, both of the indigenous population and of the nations in the region and how they operate for it. And at the same time, we have to recognize that with a more open Arctic, nations are more interested in pursuing the resources and riches of the region.
Mhm. Mhm. Awesome. Awesome. Thank you. We really appreciate having this conversation, bringing this to light, and helping us learn a little bit more about what's going on, broadly speaking, in the Arctic, and all the players and all the threat
Yeah.
multipliers that seem to be, in effect there. Thank you very
And
I
much.
guess I could
yeah,
add,
thank
if you
you.
want, let me, before we end, I could just
Yeah.
share quickly one other story, that I tell in my book. Uh,
Yeah.
in the
Please.
Arctic chapter is of Admiral James Fogo, who, as a young submariner in the mid 1980s, went up to the Arctic. And as submarines like to do a maneuver called ice pick, where they
Hmm.
pop the conning tower up, through the ice, and then the sailors can get off for a little while, and they can put on a Santa hat or play some baseball or some golf ball. And as Admiral Fogo says, don't use a white golf ball; you'll never find it. Um, and they take some pictures and send it home to the family because they're up there for many months at a time in the submarine. And then Admiral Fogo goes back about 20 years later, and now he's in command of the submarine. So now he's an admiral now, and he tries to do the same maneuver with his vessel. Tries to do this ice pick maneuver in approximately the same area near the North Pole, and he can't find enough ice in which to surface.
Mm.
And when he
Hmm.
gets there, he finds blue water and plastic waste.
Oh my God.
So that was his experience on the front lines of a changing Arctic.
Yeah. It's so, from a storytelling perspective, I'm sure there's so
That's so
much,
rich.
yeah, there's so much going on there. So hopefully someone who's listening out there is already sort of following this thread.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think there are a lot of great stories to tell to bring both the majesty and the beauty of the Arctic, but the
Yeah.
perils
Yeah.
of that to more people within a visually impactful way.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely.
And just to the thought that, we are all connected, the systems of, Earth systems connected. And, it kind of brings, this story you just told brings home the point that, the plastic we're using down here doesn't stay down, doesn't stay here.
Exactly.
The military vessels, submarines are noticing it in the Arctic. So
Yeah.
even at that level, kind of brings it full circle. So um, definitely,
Yeah.
helps put some of this into perspective. So
And here's to Canada and the US remaining best friends and learning how to work together, because that's also a big thing that we're going to need to we're going to need our American neighbors to work with us, and we're going to need to work with them as well, because the Arctic, there's a lot of coastline up there, and there's a lot of stuff going
Yeah.
on there that we can't do it
Absolutely.
alone.
It's so vital. And of course, through NORAD, the US and Canada have been operating together for many years,
mhm.
uh, especially in the Arctic. And also, I would say a thank you to Canada for hosting NATO's new Center on Climate and Security, which is based in Montreal and which
Mhm.
opened last summer. And I had the privilege of being part of the opening with former Premier Trudeau. And that is an important center within NATO to connect climate to security across all of NATO, the Arctic, but also all with all NATO nations.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot we can do there as well. So yeah, looking forward to this. And maybe, Zena, maybe we'll do some podcasting from Greenland or from somewhere,
Sure. Yeah.
one of our
Awesome.
well, thank
Awesome.
you, Sherry.
Yeah,
Yeah, this has been great. And I hope our listeners have yeah, take what they can from this thing and into their daily lives as well. And yeah, well, I'm sure we'll follow up with you again soon.
Yeah. And if folks are interested, Sherri
Yeah.
Goodman, the book is Threat Multiplier: Climate Military Leadership in the Fight for Global Security. So check it out, and keep your attention on this. Thank you, Sherri.
thank
Thank
you.
you.
Our designer is Aaliyah Kane. Music is by Peter Chapman. Our producer is Colin Miller.